Okay, we'll kick this off. Welcome everybody to Global Encounters and First Nations Peoples, 1,000 Year of Australian History seminar series for 2024. This is the first one for the year. We're going to kick it off with a fantastic seminar from Dr. Chris Urwin. But as ever, before we do, I acknowledge that we are meeting, well, at least I am sitting on the unceded lands of the Wurundjeri people of Naarm, now known as Melbourne. And I acknowledge elders past and present, and particularly those to any of the lands on which you are sitting. I also note that there's quite a lot of our colleagues and friends from Indonesia joining us tonight. So welcome, and I hope this is the first of many of the Global Encounter seminars that you might take part in. So tonight, as I said, we have Dr. Chris Urwin, who is a postdoctoral fellow who is associated with the Global Encounters and First Nations Peoples at Monash Indigenous Studies Centre. And Chris is going to be talking to us about a really interesting take on the chronology of the trepang industry and how old and how long it might have been going for. So over to you, Chris.
Thank you very much, Lynette, and thanks so much for the invitation to give this talk. It's a real honour, and just want to add my acknowledgement that I'm speaking to you from the land of the Kulin Nation, and acknowledge their elders past and present. And I acknowledge too those Indigenous communities that I'll be speaking about their heritage and the shared heritage with people from Island Southeast Asia today. So I call this talk the story so far, Archaeological Chronologies for First Nations Encounters with Makassan Voyagers in Northern Australia. And we're really going on a bit of a whistle-stop tour around Northern Australia, which is always exciting. And then, so we're going to be talking about the chronologies, the dates, what we know so far in the archaeology specifically, about when contact between First Nations people and island Southeast Asian voyagers commenced. And then I'll move into talking about some research that we've commenced to kind of fill one of these key chronological gaps in the southwest Gulf of Carpentaria, which is with the Yanyuwa community over there. My name's Chris Urwin, and I work with Indigenous communities in the Pacific and Australia, particularly on the archaeological and museum cultural heritage in general. And I'm especially fascinated by what happens when people collide and exchange ideas and things and together contribute to how places and landscapes are formed. That's kind of my my entry into all this. Okay, so I'll spend a bit of time walking us through, I suppose, the historical, the oral traditional evidence, and then talk about some of the regions of Northern Australia and the evidence that we have so far. This material might not be new to some of those of you who are working in this space at the moment. So apologies to those of you whose work I discuss. You can bring up your grievances at the end of the talk with me, that's fine. And overall, I'm going to argue that we know very little archaeologically about the timing of these Asian visits, except in one specific region of Northwest Arnhem Land, where Darrell Wesley, Sue O'Connor, Sally May, Paul Tayson, and others have been working in more recent years. That's not to say we know nothing of these other regions, but the sites have not necessarily been dated well enough to kind of build a solid understanding of what's going on. Okay. All right, and I'll conclude this talk by talking about the evidence, as I said, from the Pellew Islands, based on some surveys that were conducted in 2023 by myself and John Bradley, who's a colleague here at Monash Indigenous Studies Centre, who's been working with Yanyuwa for 43 years now, I think. And John's excellent talk on the oral traditions of Yanyuwa regarding the Makassans can be found on the Global Encounters website. All right, so let's just kind of make sure we're all on the same page here, step back and cover some of the basics, even though I know many of you already have an interest in this fascinating part of Indigenous and Indonesian history. So the Makassans visited Northern Australian coastline annually to collect trepang, which are edible sea cucumbers, highly prized in Chinese medicine. You can see one of these trepang processing camps depicted here in a lithograph, an image by Louis de Breton, who in 1839 visited Raffles Bay in the Cobourg Peninsula on Dumont d'Urville's expedition. You can see the fireplaces here, the stone lines with a superstructure supporting iron cauldrons above the fire. And it's these stone lines that are commonly preserved today, and we see in the archaeological record in the surveys and the like. You can also see smoke houses here and a tamarind tree that's presumably sprouted up from the Macassans dropping seeds of this fruit. And you can see canoes and Macassan crown in the background there. They would leave Macassar around December with the western monsoon and would work the trepang grounds until March or April before returning home on the east trade winds. Now, the term Makassan is a bit of a slippery one, but I don't think it's one we can discard very easily because it's alive, I think, in the Australian historical imaginary. It's also in common use among First Nations people in Northern Australia. So I suppose we have to address it and explain it rather than necessarily discarding it. So here I'm using it to describe not an ethnic group, but the people conducting the historically documented trepang industry organised from the port of Macassar from at least the mid-18th century. So this could include various groups from the Indonesian archipelago, such as the Bugis and even people indigenous to West Papua. And so these are the Makassan Voyagers. They came seeking not only trepang, but also turtle and pearl shell, ironwood and beeswax. And these sustained trade activities over at least a century and a half resulted in strong social and cultural relationships developing with Australia's coastal First Nations. Perhaps the best known of these relationships, due in part to the patchy nature of anthropological research across Northern Australia, was with Yolŋu of northeast Arnhem Land. And according to Yolŋu oral traditions, when the Macassans arrived on the coast, they would look out for the fluttering of each clan's flag, which meant they had been granted permission to enter the clan estates. The trepangers sailed their ships called prows to the waters of Northern Australia, spending time on the shores of various First Nations in the Kimberley region here and in Arnhem Land, and you can see the Gulf of Carpentaria down here in Northern Australia. And you can see those places in a rough representation of their sailing routes on this map. And this Kimberley region was often referred to as Kayu Jawa and Arnhem Land as Marage. And we know this industry ended in 1907 due to colonial taxation and restrictions on Asian trade brought about under the White Australia policy. So a key question for archaeologists, as well as historians and linguists and anthropologists, is when did phases of Makassan trepang fishing take place in different regions? And were there earlier phases of interaction with Asia before the trepang industry? What did those encounters look like? And that's in part what I'm here to explore, and hopefully I can give you a sense of where the archaeology is at today. But I think maybe the best place to start is the question of why do dates matter at all? I'm wary that archaeological dates might be quite dry and technical to some of you, and it can be, challenging to appreciate what they give us in a sense. So in this talk, I'm going to deal with things in broad terms where possible, and we've got a really detailed data set and publication that I can direct you to at the end if you want the nitty-gritty details. It's worth saying that dates, of course, are not important data in and of themselves. They're a means to an end, and like all new data, they must be meaningful. So they need to be from the right sites, from the right levels in the excavation. But more importantly than that, they have to help us unravel something of the past that means something to Aboriginal communities and helps us make sense of the human experience. For me, the purpose of archaeology on Makassan places has already been eloquently summarised by Annie Clark, who said that the sandy shelving beaches of the rich trepang grounds took on a dual identity for Aboriginal people, simultaneously the centre of clan estates and a window to other worlds of knowledge and experience accessed through the maritime technologies, language and cultural practices of the Makassan visitors. So here the fundamental question is, what happens when cultural worlds meet like this on these beaches? What transformations take place when people encounter one another? What exchanges are enabled when Macassans negotiate access with Aboriginal people to sea country? And how did lives transform when Asian and Aboriginal families intermarried, when new hybrid languages developed, and when objects and gifts flowed between people who had not encountered these materials before necessarily? The other reason why dates matter a great deal is that dates for island contact with islands Southeast Asia are already playing a key role in narrating aspects of the Aboriginal past in Northern Australia. So various anthropologists and archaeologists have leaned on Makassan contact as a major event by which to explain changes to Northern Australia's Aboriginal societies and economies. Right back in the mid-century with Ronald Burnt and Donald Thompson arguing that Makassan arrival and trade supercharged existing ceremonial exchange networks of Arnhem Land. Far more recently, rock art specialist Ben Gunn has linked the arrival of Macassans with a major change in the rock art of Arnhem Land, Arnhem Land's plateau around 450 years ago, when Jawoyn artists replaced red pigment with white. Then over in Blue Mud Bay in northeast Arnhem Land, Dan Rosendahl and colleagues have put forward that Makassan contact is one potential explanation for the decrease of Aboriginal shell mounding from 500 years ago. On Groot Island in the 90s, Annie Clark tentatively proposed that early contact around 800 to 900 years ago may have triggered subsistence changes at one particular site on Groot Island. And there are chronological reasons for that argument, which I'll go into in a bit. And south of Groot Island in the southwest Gulf of Carpentaria, Robin Sim and Lindy Wallace have linked a decline in stone artifact use after 450 years ago in the Sir Edward Pellew Islands to the arrival of metal tools from Asia. So these are not necessarily unreasonable inferences, but I guess the point is here, is there enough chronological evidence to support these or test them at this stage? And I guess that's the argument, is dates are important in this field of research. Okay, so what chronologies do we have from the written chronologies before we get into the archaeology? And where better to start than with Australia's most influential archaeologist and historian of this field, Campbell McKnight. Sadly, Campbell couldn't make it today, but can catch up on this recording and take me to task on my claims about his work later. Campbell conducted extensive excavations of Makassan sites in Arnhem Land in the late 1960s, as well as extensive archival research and recording of oral traditions in Macassar. He estimated that the first voyages for trepang commenced sometime after 1720, probably by 1750, at which time colonial writings describe trips from Timor and Macassar for Australian trepang and wax, and that the trepang industry, as historically known, was underway by 1780. This evidence aligns really well with a major boom in trepang exports from Macassar to China, and it's been backed up by more recent research, such as by Knapp and Sutherland, that you can see on the screen there. There are potential weaknesses in this argument. Firstly, I guess that initial trepang voyages, there's maybe an assumption that initial trepang voyages were conducted from Macassar, and second, that these voyages were documented in the same way that the later formalised industry was. McKnight's contemporary Ian Crawford, who excavated the Makassan site of Tamarinda in the Kimberley, noted that establishing a start date would be quite challenging because the Macassarees conducted some of their traditional trade in secret to avoid notice by Dutch colonists. He preferred a start date of between 1669 and 1763, based on English East India Company records. Interestingly, McKnight recorded a Macassarese oral tradition describing how their fleet took shelter in the Gulf of Carpentaria in 1669 during the war with the Dutch. So that there's some kind of corroboration there. As we can see, there are significant silences in the written archives of the trepang industry. And I think archaeology is well positioned to investigate these on Northern Australian shores and establish when specific historically documented practices, patterns of exchange and interaction emerged. Okay, what of language and oral history? These are really key records as well of these interactions. Oral tradition and linguistics hint that Northern Australia had a very long and complex contact history. and we could discuss this all day, but I'll just touch on a few key points here. So linguist Nick Evans has documented loan words from Malay and Makassanese in coastal First Nations languages from the Cobourg Peninsula to the south, all the way to the southwest Gulf of Carpentaria. Interestingly, his analysis suggests that loan words are stratified, which means that you can tell some of these have undergone changes within the language they became incorporated into. So that gives you a hint that they've been there for generations. Similarly, Antoinette Schaper's recent research found evidence of not only Makassanese and Malay loanwords, but other as yet unidentified languages from island Southeast Asia and possibly Oceania. Now, famously, Yolŋu oral traditions allude to distinct eras of interaction with Asian mariners. Speaking to anthropologist Ian McIntosh in the 80s and 90s, David Bodamora of the Waramiri clan described the earliest visitors from island Southeast Asia as being the whale-hunting Waramola and golden-skinned seafaring Baini. Several decades earlier, Yolŋu, including David Bodamora, had told Ronald and Catherine Burnt that the Baini were first to arrive from overseas, followed by the Macassans. In the 1940s to 1950s stories, the sequence is complicated by the Waramola, people who come in drifting spirit canoes on the winds that follow the wet season. So you can see this kind of complexity in the layering of these cross-seas interactions. Doubtless, these are Yolŋu histories, but I think we should be wary of extracting them to make sense of Western chronological models in a kind of straightforward, linear way. And some Yolŋu explicitly resist white historical interpretations of the Baini stories. So this is a kind of unresolved space and requires, I think, intense community consultation to resolve, where to from here. Okay, so to the archaeology and the history of the archaeology in the space, which goes back to, well, certainly as early as the 1920s with Lloyd Warner working with Yolŋu on Milingimbi Island. And back to this age, back to this stage of archaeology, scholars have sought to understand the timing of Asian visits to Northern Australia. Lloyd Warner excavated a shell mound that you can see here on Milingimbi Island near some tamarind trees. And he believed that the visits were of considerable age because the tamarinds were partly covered by dense shell midden. But it's likely he also took his lead from stories told by his Yolŋu colleagues. On the 1948 Australian-American expedition to Arnhem Land, Frederick McCarthy and Frank Setzler hoped to recover datable objects of Malay or European origin in direct association with an Aboriginal horizon. But it was not until Campbell McKnight's 1960s excavations that radiocarbon dating was first used for these sites. And much of the debate around the timing of Asian contact and Makassan contact can be traced to these dates because they produce some unusual results, and I'll get to that in a minute. Then since the 1960s, a great deal of research has taken place in the kind of early 2000s onwards, coordinated by Darryl Wesley, Sue O'Connor, Paul Payson, Sally May, and involving many others. I now want to take us on a quick tour of the key dates which help us understand the timing of Asian encounters with First Nations people. And in total, there is a total of 49 radiocarbon dates that relate directly to Asian interactions with First Nations people, Asian presence on these shores. And these dates come from three main sources. Firstly, trepang processing sites. Secondly, beeswax underlying rock art depictions of Southeast Asian ships. And thirdly, Aboriginal rock shelter and midden sites, which contain material culture from island Southeast Asia. So let's take a look by site type. Here we're heading to look at trepang processing sites to start with. And as you can see over here at the far western end of Makassan Southeast Asian voyaging, we know very little about the age of Makassan sites in the Kimberley. There are no carbon dates for this whole region. And Al Patterson's recent work with the Balangara Aboriginal Corporation is aimed at rectifying this. Ian Crawford in the 60s excavated at Tamarinda in Napier Broom Bay, uncovering 8 Makassan stone lines buried underneath a European stone line. And he did recover an 1823 VOC coin, which is kind of, one of those chronological hints what's going on over there. Over here, a bit further to the east, is the Cobourg Peninsula and the site of Barlambidge, which remarkably is still the most westerly trepang fishery to be dated so far. Scott Mitchell excavated this site and acquired 2 dates. One was modern, and the other, as we might expect, is sort of clusters around 1830s. But Scott Mitchell's key contribution was his investigation of what happened to Aboriginal within Aboriginal economies and lifeways following encounters with visitors from Southeast Asia. He excavated Aboriginal midden sites and found that dugong and turtle hunting really massively increased after these initial contacts, perhaps showing that the adoption and adaptation of Asian outrigger canoes, dugout canoes and iron harpoon tips transformed Aboriginal marine mobilities and hunting practices. But there is a bit of a problem here, which is that some of these early research programs, through no fault of their own, but through the expensiveness of carbon dating, rely on the presence of contact materials to identify change and to see which layers in the excavations are prior to contact and following. And so that means you might not actually pick up the signature of early encounters, which predate the arrival of large quantities of trade goods. So you're sort of reliant on the material signature there. Let's pass over Anuru Bay here, which is a really, really significant site and deserves a bit more detailed treatment. So pass over Anuru Bay for a moment to Entrance Island here. And you can see the cross-section here of Campbell McKnight's excavation at Entrance Island in the 60s. This is at the mouth of the Liverpool River. McKnight excavated here in 1967, and interestingly, and you can see this on the image, he found an entirely buried stone line underneath the stone line he was seeking to excavate. So this is a good indication, firstly, that we have a very active coast in Northern Australia with cyclones burying sites regularly, but it also indicates phases of use by Southeast Asian mariners. And this is where we also get an introduction to the problems with the series of dates that were acquired in the 1960s. You can see those dates here. So Entrance Island, it looks like, you know, the date from the trepang fishery is about 800 years old, which looks pretty unusual when you compare it with the historical chronologies. The dates have been much debated, but there's probably 2 key problems. One is that at the time, and through no fault of the excavator, radiocarbon dating was in its infancy, and it required really large samples of charcoal to get a date. They had to gather charcoal from many different excavation layers, and that means you're not really dating one event or one, you know, trepang processing event, one attempt to process those trepang, but you're dating a series of different events. So you're averaging that time out. The other issue is that you can date wood charcoal that has inbuilt age. So if the burned piece you're dating comes from a tree that was 400 years old when it died, when you go to date that charcoal, you get a strangely old date. Ethnographically, we know that the Makassan voyagers may have preferred to burn mangrove wood for processing trepang, and McKnight knew this and dated a mangrove stump in Anuru Bay, which did demonstrate that it had a couple of centuries of inbuilt age. So I think Campbell McKnight pretty well resolved that, that kind of question back in the 60s. Nevertheless, this is a really interesting site, and McKnight at the time was of the opinion that it had some antiquity. And finally, over here at the site of Liaba, off the coast of Groote Island, on a small islet there, we see the same thing going on with both of these dates sort of unusually old for the historical records if we compare them. Okay, let's zoom in here to the site of Anuru Bay, because this is the best studied site of encounter between Southeast Asian mariners and Aboriginal people in the entirety of Northern Australia. Nearly half of the entire population of radiocarbon dates comes from here. So that's 19 dates in all. And they come from, firstly, McKnight's excavations in the 1960s, followed by Darrell Wesley and team in the from 2008 to 2010, that should say, not 2020. McKnight notably uncovered several stone lines, but also a stone-lined grave in which 2 people had been buried. And as you can see from the previous slide, the dates for this site are pretty unusual. You don't even know how to get back to that slide, but never mind. So they calibrate to like the mid-19th, the mid-15th, and the mid-14th centuries. So as I said, pretty unusual. And later excavations by Darrell Wesley and team sought to resolve the site's chronology. And they went about this by dating charcoal stuck to the bottom of the stones from the stone line to ensure that they were in the right position stratigraphically. And this certainly yielded results and showed that most of the stone line hearths date to the 18th and 19th centuries. But there are 2 interesting features that were dated, which I want to draw your attention to. Firstly, Fenja Thayden-Ringel and colleagues dated tooth enamel from the 2 burials excavated by Campbell McKnight. And the deeper interment dates to between 1500 and 1660. And these individuals had filed teeth and dental staining, probably caused by chewing of betel nut and lime. And they also used isotope analysis to show that these individuals probably came from South Sulawesi. They also excavated a living or working floor, which contained charcoal and pottery. And these levels dated as early as 1515 to 1645. So this is clearly, there is no evidence that these dates are associated with trepang processing because they don't come from the stone lines. And so this may well be evidence of things going on before Makassan arrival. And so Darrell Wesley and colleagues saw these finds as evidence that Asian voyagers were exploring and exploiting other resources from along the Arnhem Land coastline prior to the establishment of the trepang industry. Okay, moving to rock art sites. Well, there's only one that's been dated, and this is the important site of Julieri in the Wellington Range. And this site is one where Asian voyagers have been depicted, and then these beeswax motifs have been made later on top of these images. And so by dating organic material in the beeswax motifs, beeswax pellets, Paul Tayson and colleagues were able to show the sort of minimum age of these paintings. You know, they have to be older than the motif that's overlying it. Now, as we would expect, 5 of these dates cluster in the kind of historical trepang era, you know, the sort of mid-18th century, early 19th century, but one of them dates to the period 1530 to 1660. So really consistent with what we're seeing at Anuru Bay. And it's pretty certain that Aboriginal people saw and painted this ship before 1660. And that's that one there on the right. Okay, now over to another key source of evidence, which is Aboriginal rock shelters and midden sites. Now, in this region, we have several important sites in the Wellington Range. Again, same region as Julieri, and on Hmong country. These were excavated again by Darrell Wesley and colleagues, and the Wellington Range is located about 15 kilometres inland of Anuru Bay on this coast, near to the coast here. Excavations at the rock art complexes of Maliwawa and Malarak have uncovered pottery, metal and glass beads, which have obviously been brought inland from those coastal places. The upper levels of this site here, Malarak 1, have 4 dates, which you can see here, that are out of sequence. But I think it's worth mentioning because they found alongside glass, flaked glass, glass beads and metal. And most of these dates are significantly older than the trepang era, trepang industry era. Although they could date, those contact materials could date to around 1860. All right, this date here these dates here come from the site of Bald Rock 3, which is in Maliwawa, and some of the finds at Maliwawa, as you can see, included beads and other contact material. And you can see that obviously this date here, from the 1530s, was associated with contact material. So again, it's just confirming that pattern that we're seeing from that coastline and heading into the Wellington Range, that there is activity prior to the historically known Makassan trepang era. And based on these excavations, Darrell Wesley and Marani Litster have argued that glass beads flowed inland from the coast during the 18th century, and that these items were probably demanded by Aboriginal people in return for their participation in the trepang industry. Let's head to the other end of Arnhem Land now, to Groot Island, where Annie Clark conducted her 1991 to 1992 PhD research with Arnhem families. She found that several coastal rock shelters in this region here were first occupied after Makassan arrival, which she identified as a change in the island's social geography. Like Scott Mitchell, she found that subsistence practices changed after contact with foreign voyagers and fishers and traders, with a more diverse array of shellfish being acquired from sand and mud habitats. And she interpreted this as a change in mobility patterns, with shellfish being acquired to sustain large groups gathered near Makassan camps and trepang processing sites in the wet season. So really significant study in terms of these kind of social transformations and how people got to know each other and facilitated exchange over generations. Now, many of these dates that you see here, which are sort of in these sort of 1600 era and the like, are actually underlying Makassan contact materials. So they don't sort of, that's not surprising. They could well be from the trepang era. But two sites are of special interest, and I think they deserve to be kind of re-excavated in our literature reviews and our understanding of when Asian voyagers may have visited Groot Island. Firstly, Marnculloch Cave is the site here, and these dates here. And this site was dated with 1 charcoal and 2 shell samples, and all 3 of these cluster in the 1550s. And the dates are directly associated with deposits of glass, metal, 3 sherds of earthenware pottery, and a glass bead. It's far from impossible that this is evidence of 16th century trade with voyagers from Southeast Asia, and not necessarily from Makassar. The site of Dadarinka here also deserves special mention, and you'll see these ages here are much older than the trepang industry. This site has been much debated because it's where Annie and her Arnhem colleagues found a single friable pottery sherd, and you can see it pictured here, with a sandy temper in spit 1 of their excavation, spit 10 of their excavation. This find was located between 2 dates, the dates that you can see there. The sherd is very old, very small, well, old according to those carbon dates, and the archaeology of Dadarinka would need to be revisited for us to be sure what this means. But there is actually no reason to discard this date out of hand. We know, for example, that the dingo arrives via island Southeast Asia or Melanesia to Northern Australia around 3,500 years ago. We can see that the sherd looks very different in composition to Makassan era pottery, as we would expect if it's 1,000 years old or so. The site's sediments were noted to be very firm, and in fact, this is exactly what we'd expect to find if we're picking up traces of these occasional interactions that precede the Makassan trepang industry in Northern Australia. All right, I'm not going to touch on this site here, Borgalo, because there's not really time, but you can read about it if you choose to. Okay, but I suppose the point to make in relation to that particular site is that it's incredible how little archaeological evidence comes from Yolŋu country, given how powerful Yolŋu stories have been in narrating the history of Makassan voyaging. It's actually remarkable how little kind of archaeology there has been of those sites. So this graph here kind of shows you the radiocarbon date ranges for all of those dates that I've just discussed and just shown you. And there's a couple of key things that I really would want you to notice. One is that these early series dates look very, very odd. The ones that were acquired from the trepang stone line sites by McKnight in the 60s, they look very strange. And if you look in light blue, these are all of the dates associated directly with stone lines. And they align, their medians align pretty well with that 1780 date from McKnight's historical research. So you're thinking about, if it initiated in 1720s, definitely by 1750, and then was well underway by 1780. The evidence does actually confirm the historical research concerning the trepang industry. And we also see this pattern with the rock art, those median ages for the Jiliri rock art, except for these kind of intriguing dates. We have that intriguing early date, sort of the or late 1500s, early 1600s, and the same with the burials at Anuru Bay and the living floor with pottery at Anuru Bay. So this is the kind of evidence that we're looking for that might be reliable for early phases of interaction. And from these dates, we can derive a few phases of interaction. Firstly, we can derive a phase of kind of occasional encounters between Aboriginal people and Asian seafarers between perhaps 1,000 years ago and 1550. This phase is very speculative. As we've said, there's a lack of radiocarbon evidence so far, but we would expect the evidence for an era of rare or chance encounters to be fragmentary. So it's not actually inconsistent. So we have the pottery sherd at Dadarinka, and we have Asian material culture at Mankala Cave and Bald Rock 3, which potentially date to this broad era. We don't know who was doing the voyaging, but the diverse linguistic influences on Northern Australian languages and Yolŋu descriptions of pre-Makassan voyagers might be echoes of this era. So working out where the seafarers come from would require sorting of these kind of small finds like the Dadarinka sherds by comparing them with the kind of chemical composition of pottery from various island Southeast Asian locations. And I think there's a lot of potential for that kind of research. And teams like Al Patterson's are engaged in that kind of sourcing. Darrell Wesley, Paul Tayson, and their respective colleagues have also proposed an early era of interaction, as did Sandra Bowdler and Annie Clark decades earlier. In fact, Sandra Bowdler made the salient point that it would be equally appropriate to date the commencement of these early interactions to around 3,300 years ago when the dingo arrived in Northern Australia. The next phase is indicated by the early deposits and burials at Anuru Bay and the oldest proud depiction at Jiliri. And this era, which is tentatively assigned to 1550 to 1750, cross-cultural interactions may have increased in regularity and intensity initiated by entrepreneurial voyagers from island Southeast Asia. The Burnts, interestingly, suggested that the pre-Makassan Baini visitors to Yolŋu Country were the seafaring Bajau people who were highly mobile traders across island Southeast Asia. And a small quantity of introduced material at Bald Rock 3 probably dates to this era, showing that traded objects flowed to the Wellington Range from the coast at this time. And the next proposed phase is, of course, the historically documented Makassan trepang industry, 1750 to around 1880, which aligns really well with the trade archives from Macassar, with Campbell McKnight's surmises on the history of this. And the start date derives from the first evidence of stone line use at Anuru Bay, which is a very well dated site, and 3 proud depictions at Jiliri. So you can see how Northwest Arnhem Land is actually, really has provided the basis for many of these interpretations, and a lot more needs to be done in other regions. Trepang processing continued at Anuru Bay through the middle of the 19th century and commenced at Barlumbidge. And in this era, Groote Island people were aggregating at sites like Aberg Bamanja near Makassan camps, where they acquired Asian material culture. And finally, we know from the historical record that the Makassan trepang industry was in decline from the 1880s before ceasing in 1907. Although it did persist on the Kimberley coast. Okay, so we've had the one part of the whistle-stop tour, and now we're going to head to just kind of briefly touch on some recent research that we've initiated with Yanyuwa communities over here in the Sir Edward Pellew Islands, and we've commenced doing together. So yeah, this is kind of answering the question, kind of where to next. So we're kind of preparing for excavation and further research over here. So here we're aiming to add new dates and artifact analyses for trepang fishery sites at what is the easternmost location of regular Makassan voyaging There's not a single date for island Southeast Asian contact with Yanyuwa people. As I've said, these places have really rich oral traditional Yanyuwa record, and you can find John Bradley's talk on this online. So here in the Sir Edward Pellew Islands, there are 19 places associated with the Makassans. Most of these are on the major islands, and a few are on small offshore islets. Each place has an original Yanyuwa name, and some also have a Makassan place name. And today there's a great deal of interest among Yanyuwa, young and old, for uncovering the history of these places and ensuring they're preserved for future generations. So at the Yanyuwa's invitation, John Bradley and I commenced surveys in 2023 with the Yanyuwa Liantawidagara Sea Ranger Unit and Anton Johnston, who is a Junkai or guardian for these sites from the Rumbriya clan. And we revisited these 4 sites here that I've highlighted. And Makassan heritage in this area is, by the way, also Yanyuwa heritage, because these communities intermarried and many Yanyuwa have Makassan in their genealogies. Now, I said relocated these sites because they were previously surveyed by Richard Baker, the anthropologist, with Yanyuwa elders in the early 1980s. And those reports have been a really useful baseline for assessing how these places have changed through time. And assessing change is really important because these trepang processing sites are, in archaeologist Scott Mitchell's words, a transient heritage. They are all located on low-lying coasts under severe threat from erosion or burial by wave activity, especially during tropical cyclones. And as many of you would know, this community, Yanyuwa and Borroloola, the township, has been hit again very recently by a major cyclone and flooding. And this map is really just showing the areas where the coastlines are eroding, which is pretty much all of the, or many of the significant Makassan places. The first site we visited is this one, Karawa, on Little Vanderlyn Island's northwest coast. And here there are a series of stone lines with nearby tamarins. You can see the stone lines here, and the rangers here have installed sandbags to protect this site. Karawa translates as the teacher, which hints at the kind of diverse cross-cultural interactions that form these places. Today, there are 2 recognisable Makassan stone lines and 4 jumbled and disjointed stone arrangements. In 1983, Richard Baker found the site in far better condition with 8 recognisable stone lines, including 5 in an excellent state of preservation and extensive scatters of earthenware pottery. All of the pottery is now gone, and you can see these sites in not the best state. The site that I showed you before, Karawa 1, has remained fairly well protected, particularly by this sand spit here, which has kind of protected it from the worst of the erosion, whereas these sites here are located on this coast, which has been subject to a great deal of coastal erosion and cyclone activity. So this sand spit here has moved through time, but it has preserved this site quite well. And we do find scatters of shell among these stones, but all of the pottery has been removed by fishers and tourists. So these sites are really there is a great deal of urgency to the work that we're doing with the Yanyuwa Sea Rangers to try and understand these sites and plan for their preservation. The next site I want to show you is the site of Wuluntur on Vanderlyn Island's southwest coast. And here we find 4 arrangements of red sandstone blocks and slabs. They're quite different in appearance to other stone lines in the Pellews. They're much shorter, they're about 2.5 meters long, and most of the other stone lines are 6 to 10 meters long. So there's a bit of a question of what these represent. They may represent either very small trepang processing hearths, or that much of these structures has been buried and we're just seeing a small amount of them. And there is, again, no pottery to be found at these places. It's all been removed from these sites. Karamaniura, the third of the sites we visited, is at the southernmost point of Law Island, which is a small islet off Vanderlyn Island's northwest coast. Yanyuwa old people knew this site as a centre of Makassan activity in the Pellews, and we found diverse evidence of Makassan presence in the form of tamarins, a grave, 5 stone lines, one of which looks like Europeans have modified it, a stone floor potentially. Not really sure what's going on with that feature. And also exotic ballast stone in the intertidal zone of this site, and a depression which may once have been a smokehouse. So excavations are needed to confirm these features, but their variety may indicate the site was used intensively or is well preserved due to its protected location. And this is us surveying the site in 2023. And this is the feature we identified as a Makassan grave site. It's made from flat slabs of sandstone, part buried and oriented vertically. And the longest side of the grave is oriented north-south, which I think would be consistent with Islamic burial practice, assuming the body was placed facing west. Baker noted the same key features of this site, so it's actually preserved quite well, except for the grave. He noted instead what he called a European stone line with a 2-metre high wooden post sticking up vertically. But I'm pretty sure that's actually referring to the grave. And we know that one of the Makassan grave on Winchelsea Island has a wooden post, or had a wooden post installed in it. Although this place is geomorphologically stable, European trepang fissures have altered at least one stone line, and the grave post has not survived. And pottery has entirely been removed from this site by collectors. And this is the very out-of-place stone found in the intertidal zone, which could be from a European ship or it could be from a Makassan ship. Okay, the final site is this one of Jalawaja, which is a small bay on the central western coast of Arnhem Island. According to Yanyuwa oral tradition, there was a senior Makassan's grave at this site, so it is often called the captain's seat in English by Yanyuwa. We located 7 features at this site, 5 Makassan stone lines, a wide stone wall that was probably rearranged from a Makassan stone line by Europeans who lived at the site, and a smaller stone arrangement, which could be a grave, but it doesn't look like the other one that's located. The local coastline here has remained stable since 1988, but it has been subject to quite severe effects from European inhabitation, or at least the stone lines that were located close to a teacher's residence here, which you can see, and it has a kind of rubbish pit here. So the rangers are really keen to kind of remediate this site and find out something from the stone lines that are better preserved among it. So our research is preliminary, but it suggests that the Pellews were a major centre of Makassan trepang fishing. The sites here appear to be more concentrated than those of the Kimberley and Wellesley Islands, and comparable to those of Arnhem Land's Cobourg Peninsula, where in 1992 there were 21 remaining sites on a 90-kilometre long peninsula. So that's a very similar concentration. And if that's a proxy for cross-cultural interaction, then perhaps there's a similar intensity of interaction with Makassan voyagers and potentially earlier visitors. One of the major problems for the sea rangers in their aspirations to protect their Makassan heritage is the transience of these sites. Recent satellite image modelling by Geoscience Australia has shown that the Gulf of Carpentaria is the most dynamic coast in the continent, with 27% of Gulf coastlines in flux since 1988. Mostly these coastlines are growing, and you can see these blue ones here are growing, but in the Pellew Islands themselves, that's not the case. And these beach lines are disappearing by a rate of 20 centimetres to 4 metres per year. So that's going to have a very significant effect on Makassan heritage. And our 40-year follow-up of these sites shows that the material evidence of Makassan Yanyuwa encounters is highly ephemeral. Of 28 recognisable features that Baker found with Yanyuwa old people at these sites, we were able to locate only 17. And so this aligns closely with the experience Scott Mitchell had over in the Cobourg Peninsula. So today there are 2 main avenues for preserving these vulnerable places. Firstly, managing coastal erosion and sedimentation through earthworks and sandbagging. And secondly, recovering oral traditional, artifactual and chronological information while these places exist. And so the priorities for managing these places will be set by Yanyuwa and the sea rangers in coming years. And it's in this context that we conducted our research with the aim of adding new knowledge about these important places and supporting the aspirations of Yanyuwa to re-engage with these places and develop strategies to preserve them. So more to come from this research, and yeah, sorry for the real whistle-stop tour around Northern Australia, but thank you for listening, and here's a few acknowledgements, and you can also find a link to the full data set that I was talking about too. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Chris. You will have noticed one of Chris's acknowledgements was to our dear colleague Lily Yulianti Farid, who would be smiling down on us with very open and warm heart, because this is such an important project close to her heart. And as I was speaking this afternoon to our colleagues in Makassar, we were all discussing how important all of this is. So thank you so much, Chris. Really appreciate that. We've got a little bit of time for questions. If anybody has any, please try and either get my attention or pop something into the chat. Either way. It's quite hard. I'm having a little difficulty seeing everybody, so not what I'm supposed to do. Guy has put his hand up. Thank you, Guy. Go ahead, Guy.
Thank you. Thank you, Chris, for a very, very clear presentation. I wanted to ask sort of a very ignorant question. Is a lot of this research that you're citing and kind of dealing with is assuming or dealing with Makassan, so it's unidirectional. Has anyone been looking at the, let's say, opposite coasts, or to establish whether Aboriginal Australians went the other way?
Well, that's a great question, Guy. Thank you very much. And well, certainly my colleagues, I mean, Lynette has been working on a documentary with the ABC, and our team has been, it's certainly there on the history of visiting Makassar from places like Groot Island and the Cobalt Peninsula. There's definitely a long history of that. That's in the kind of historical documents, but there's also photographs, I think, from the 1800s of Aboriginal people in the port city of Makassar, which are quite remarkable, and some other documentation of them being there. So definitely, and there's papers coming out at the moment talking about the potential influences had on rock art as well. We can't assume that rock art depictions of Makassan or Southeast Asian vessels is from, as you say, unidirectional voyaging. It may be because Aboriginal people have come back and then depicted these vessels. So yeah, no, it's a great question, and undoubtedly it's not unidirectional. Although
I can add a little bit to that, Guy. One of the things that the early Dutch colonizers, particularly the officials based in Makassar, is that they record in their journals that the port is filled with Australians, and I'm pretty sure they're not referring to English people. I think they're referring to Aboriginal people. So yeah, definitely bi-directional. Anybody else got their hand up? Yes, I can see Batara. Hello again.
Oh yeah. Hello, Lynette.
I might get Booty to mute. Ah, there you go. Thank you. You now need to unmute yourself, Batara.
Okay. Can you hear my voice?
Yes, we can.
All right. Okay, so sorry, because we are here like together in this Zoom. So my name is Batara, and I'm also from Makassar, and this is very, very interesting presentation about the archaeological stuff in Australia, and especially in Yanyuwa region, because what I know is only in Yolŋu people region, but this is something new for me. I just curious about the name of the sites that you mentioned before, Chris, like Jalabuaja. Is there any specific meaning of the name in Yanyuwa region of Jalabuaja, because it's also Makassar language. the meaning is crocodile net. So jala means net and guaja is crocodile in Makassar. So I'm just wondering, is there something relation about the name? Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah, no, that's yeah. Thank you very much, Batara, for your engagement. And yes, I mean, unfortunately, John Bradley is not here. He yeah, wasn't able to be here tonight, but he has worked with Yanyuwa for 43 years, and he's been working on these kind of stories and place names. I don't recall that one being on the kind of list that we have. We'd worked with our late colleague Lily Yulianti Farid on translating some of these place names. So Gadawa being teacher. I don't know the Elijah one, but that's yeah, a conversation that we should pick up after this by email. Yeah, definitely.
In fact, anybody who has any questions or information or anything that you'd like to throw at us, just feel free to email the Global Encounters. We've got on our website, there's a special email address, so you're able to pop an email to us and we can respond. Does anybody else have any questions or comments? I can see Ian McNiven's just flicked his light on, so maybe he has something to say.
Well spotted, Lynette. Fantastic talk, Chris. Very clear. And you're really setting up the that pre-industry dates. And you're making me think that maybe that Mobiag piece of ceramic is a lot older than the 1500. I thought it was.
Yeah.
Look, one thing that you mentioned the Islamic grave. Can you hear me all right?
Just breaking up a bit there, Ian. I think you said you mentioned the Islamic grave.
That's right, yeah. And it strikes me, I mean, the whole religious dimension to Makassan voyaging to Northern Australia, that sure, if most people are in fact from the Islamic faith, that there should be quite a significant sort of signature of that in the archaeology. I mean, particularly if people need to pray 5 times a day to Mecca, etc., etc. So, so where is it? At one level, you would think it would have to be there somewhere. So, I don't know what we would need to look at, and it probably where the collaboration with our Indonesian colleagues would be like extremely useful in this regard. What should we be looking for?
Yeah, yeah. So there's a sort of like there's an ethnographic thread there to kind of untangle and see where that goes and what it means for the archaeology. Yeah, no, thanks, Ian. That's a really...
At the moment in Makassar, which you can see on the screen, a group of people, including Booty, who's waving to us, and Tummy, hi. So this is a group of scholars, young scholars, who are writing about the Makassan Australian connections through the trepang industry. And having spent time with them this afternoon, I found that there were people who were interested in the Islamic components of the connections, but also various trades goods. And I recall somebody was actually looking at arak, which is the alcoholic spirits that was being traded. So I think by collaborating with our colleagues in Makassar, we're getting a much more fulsome story than we would ever get from just looking at it from the Australian side. It's really quite exciting.
Absolutely.
I'm afraid we're running out of time, which is really disappointing. But before we go, I'm going to tell you what's coming up in our seminar series next. David is going to drop in a new slide for me, I believe. Here we go. So our next Global Encounters, I will be zooming in. I think it's from New Orleans. Dazao Chiu is going to be talking about Aboriginal Australia through Chinese eyes. She's been doing some amazing work. She's at Macquarie University as a postdoctoral fellow, and we've had great collaborations with her and conversations. She's really fascinating, and I think you're going to really enjoy this work. It's really what do Chinese think about Aboriginal Australia, which is a very much untapped area. And then in May, we're going to have a conversation between Dr. Stephanie Mawson, University of Lisbon, and Dr. Christy Flannery from Australia's Catholic University, which is kind of a bit like a book launch, an online book launch, but it's also a real discussion around her very excellent book, Incomplete Conquest, The Limits of Spanish Empire and the 17th Century Philippines. And finally, much as I don't actually want to do this, we're going to show you a 30-second trailer for a documentary that's going to be on Sunday night, 6:30, which is something that we have been working with the ABC when we were in Makassan last year. So I'll let this take us out. Thank you. Thanks, David.
Thank you.
Oh, we don't have any volume. Volume's not working. Ah. Sorry, everyone.
Is the volume working now?
I couldn't hear it.
Okay, sorry. It's not
For
muted.
anyone who's wondering, that is the magnificent mosque in Makassan, which is a spectacular sight. You can't sort of miss it. Let's try again.
Okay, I'm not muted. The page isn't muted, so it should work.
Okay, let's go.
If it doesn't work, I've put the link in the chat.
Okay, great. Thank you. Okay, it's not going to work for some reason.
Okay. Sorry,
Okay.
everyone.
Okay, everybody, the link is in the chat. Well, will be in the chat in a moment.
No, it's in the chat now.
Okay. I can't see it, but that doesn't mean anything. I'm just being blind. Yeah, it doesn't come up.
Yeah, so that's 6:30 this coming Sunday night. It's got footage of when we went to Makassan last year, and some of our friends from Makassan now who are in the meeting with us now might be in it as well. But yeah, it's
yes, that's quite likely. I mean, maybe I could try and share my screen. Maybe I could see if it works for me, Chris. David. I'll give it a quick go. Go away. See how that goes.
Next week on Compass, there's something really exciting about the story because it's my family that's gone across to another country and have lived overseas.
It's extremely likely that there are descendants of Aboriginal people here in Makassan, and it is extremely likely that there are descendants of Makassan sailors in Australia.
It's always been that storyline in my family. That's the connection I'm looking for.
The Lost Families, next week on Compass.
I hope you could see that.
Yeah.
I don't know.
yeah, no, that's fine.
Okay. So I hope I see you all in next month when we have Dulcie doing her talk about Aboriginal Australians through Chinese eyes.
Here's the link to the page for the next seminar.
Thank you.
The chat. And yeah, we've also got the link there for the documentary this Sunday.
Thank you. And also, I'd like to just say a quick thank you to Tami. That's a very useful comment you've made there about the Islamic State University and what we might be able to discuss at our symposium, because we are, I had forgotten to mention, holding our symposium this year in September in Makassan. So we will be there. We'll be back there again, and I will save the chat so that we can respond to all the questions. So thank you, everybody.
Thank you, Chris.
Thank you so
Thanks,
much.
Chris.
That was an absolutely fantastic seminar. Thank you. Good night, everyone. Bye.
Bye.